The kingdom of Ruhamba stretched across wide valleys, sun-baked plains, and tall ridges that seemed to scrape the heavens. It was a land known for its abundance of stone, black granite, red sandstone, and ancient shimmering quartz that the elders claimed held memories of the past. At its center stood a towering palace carved directly from a mountain, a structure so vast and imposing that travelers often mistook it for a natural formation. This was the pride of King Mandebvu, a man whose ambitions were spoken of in every neighboring village. He cared for conquest, for borders, for the sound of marching armies and the glitter of expanding territories. What he did not care for, or perhaps simply did not understand, was the quiet tenderness required of a father. His heart knew strategy, not affection, dominance, not connection. And so, when his only child was born, he approached her life as he approached every political matter, with distance. The princess, Nurai, entered the world on a night when the moon swallowed the sun in a perfect eclipse. Darkness and fire circled above Ruhamba, and the elders gathered in trembling awe. They declared it a sign, a mark upon her destiny, one that could bring either extraordinary blessing or catastrophic upheaval. Her mother, Queen Toriro, held her close with a gentle smile, whispering that the child would grow into a light no eclipse could ever dim. But the king only stared, uncertain what to make of a daughter born under a sky that defied nature. For the first years of her life, the queen shielded Nurai from the kingdom's superstitions, but fate had its own rhythm. When the queen died suddenly from an illness that swept through the palace, everything changed. The king, already distant, crumbled inward. He withdrew from his daughter as though she carried the disease itself. Court advisors, men who gained influence through fear, began whispering poisonous ideas, that the eclipsed child was the source of misfortune, that her presence invited bad omens, that her mother's death was merely the first sign of ruin. Slowly these words wormed their way through the palace halls. No one dared defy the advisors, for they spoke with the king's authority. Soon servants avoided the wing where Nurai slept. Court musicians pretended not to see her when tuning their instruments. Even the script keepers who maintained royal histories quietly removed her name from records, claiming they were correcting lineage errors. Murals depicting the royal family were repainted. Her tiny painted face vanished beneath thick coats of pigment. No one announced the erasure out loud. It simply happened silently, like a sickness that spreads unnoticed until it is everywhere. Only one person refused to forget her. Gogo Melita, her childhood caretaker, an elderly woman with joints stiffened by time but eyes that carried the clarity of truth. She brushed Nurai's hair each morning, shared stories of old queens each night, and spoke of the prophecy etched into the stones of the royal quarry. According to ancient lore, a child born during an eclipse would one day command the memory of the earth itself. "You were not a curse," Gogo Melita often whispered. "You were born marked by power the kingdom no longer understands." But her comfort could only do so much. The reality of the palace weighed heavily on Nurai, pressing on her spirit like a never-ending shadow. As the years passed, citizens of Ruhamba were instructed, subtly at first, then openly, to behave as though the princess did not exist. When she walked through the palace courtyard, people looked through her, not at her. When she attended ceremonies, seats around her were left intentionally empty. She was given small duties far below her station, polishing stone corridors, writing letters no one would read, organizing scrolls that were intentionally shuffled again the next day. Life folded her into the background until she felt more like a ghost than a living girl. Yet despite this suffocating isolation, something inside her refused to die. A quiet ache lived in her chest, a longing for belonging, but beneath that ache flickered a small ember of defiance, a subtle ignition that grew each time she witnessed injustice or felt unseen. It was not rage, not yet. But it was the seed of something powerful. There were moments when she wept alone in the courtyard behind the palace. There, deep in the earth, lay the entrance to the ancient royal quarry, a place from which the kingdom had carved its proudest monuments. And on nights when her sorrow spilled freely, the stones around her shifted in ways no wind could explain. Tiny pebbles rolled toward her feet. Hairline cracks appeared and vanished. The ground pulsed like something alive. She noticed these strange movements but did not understand them. Yet unknowingly, the earth was already answering her pain, responding to a destiny written the moment the eclipse darkened the skies over Ruhamba. The famine began quietly, almost politely, like a shadow stretching across the fields before anyone notices the sun has dimmed. First, the rainfall shifted, coming later than expected. Then the crops, usually abundant and proud, began to droop in the heat, their leaves curling as if whispering warnings the people could not decipher. As the weeks passed, the drought sharpened its claws. Rivers shrank into thin, dusty scars on the land, cattle collapsed where they stood, children began sleeping with hollow stomachs. Ruhamba, once known for its thriving granaries and vibrant markets, now echoed with the sound of hunger. Fear crept through the streets like a living thing. The priests were the first to give that fear a name. Clad in heavy robes, gripping staffs adorned with ancient sigils, they declared that the famine was not natural, it was spiritual retribution. Standing atop the temple steps, they raised their voices and announced that the kingdom had ignored a powerful omen. The eclipsed child still lived among them. They spoke of Nurai as though she were a poisonous weed growing in the heart of the palace. She is the shadow that blocks the sun, they proclaimed. Her presence stifles the earth. The citizens, desperate for an explanation, clung to these words even if they did not fully believe them. Hunger makes faith easy and logic difficult. The king, already fragile in his authority, became the perfect prey for political manipulation. His advisors, men who thrived on chaos, approached him daily with grim faces and heavy sighs. They presented carefully crafted arguments, that the priests were stirring rebellion, that the citizens were losing trust, that the kingdom needed a dramatic gesture to restore hope. Slowly they tightened their verbal net around him. A ruler must sacrifice even what he loves, they said. Even his own blood if necessary. Whether he loved Nurai at all was uncertain, but their words struck his insecurities with deadly precision. They whispered that banishing her would satisfy the gods, restore the land, and renew his image as a strong king. Fear is a fragile crown and King Mandebvu wore it heavily. Eventually, broken by pressure and drowned by political voices louder than his own conscience, he agreed. His decision was announced across the kingdom with the coldness of a royal decree, not the heartbreak of a father. Preparations began immediately. A platform was constructed in the central courtyard, an open space where royal celebrations were usually held. Now it would be used for humiliation. On the morning of the banishment, the courtyard filled with citizens, though none dared speak above a whisper. Soldiers lined the walkway, their armor glinting under the harsh sun. Nurai was summoned from her quiet corner of the palace and escorted to the stage as though she were a criminal awaiting judgment. She walked with steady steps, though her heart pounded and her throat felt tight. When she reached the platform, an advisor unrolled a scroll and declared in a booming voice that she was unworthy of the throne, a bringer of misfortune, and a threat to the prosperity of Ruhamba. Each word struck her harder than the last. The crowd remained silent, not because they agreed, but because they had been ordered to keep their backs straight and their eyes averted. As the decree echoed across the courtyard, Nurai lifted her eyes toward the palace balcony where her father stood. Their gazes almost met. Almost. But at the final moment, he looked away, turning his face toward the horizon as though he could not bear the weight of what he had done, or perhaps he simply could not bear the sight of her. That single gesture carved a deeper wound into her heart than the entire ceremony. When the guards took her arms and led her through the city gates, the citizens obeyed the chilling command given earlier, turn your backs. Do not watch her, do not speak to her, do not remember her. One by one, thousands of bodies rotated away, forming a living wall of silence. She passed rows of people staring rigidly at the ground, pretending she was already gone. Even children, confused and frightened, were guided to look away. Nurai had never felt so alone. Beyond the gates lay the path toward the Deadlands, a region few dared enter. It was a skeletal land of abandoned mines, broken monuments and ancient stone ruins left from forgotten eras. The air there carried a stillness that felt older than time. As the guards pushed her forward, dust swirling around her ankles, she inhaled the dry, metallic scent of the wasteland. The journey was not long, but every step deepened the ache in her chest. When they reached the border of the kingdom and stepped onto Deadland's soil, the guards released her without ceremony or compassion. But something happened in that moment, something subtle but powerful. As her foot crossed the invisible line separating Ruhamba from the Deadlands, the ground trembled faintly beneath her. It was not enough to alarm the guards, who were already turning back, eager to leave the cursed place. The tremor was small, almost like a greeting. Almost like the earth whispering, "You have come home." Unnoticed by all but her, the stones shifted as if recognizing her return. The kingdom had cast her out, but the land, older, wiser and filled with ancient memory, had not forgotten her. And for the first time in years, Nurai felt something stir inside her. Not fear, not sorrow, but the quiet beginning of destiny. The Deadlands greeted Nurai with a silence so complete it felt like a living presence. The wind blew weakly across the barren flats, carrying grit that stung her skin and filled the spaces between her teeth. For the first time in her life, there were no palace walls, no servants watching her from the shadows, no Gogo Melita whispering comfort. There was only the endless stretch of cracked earth and jagged rocks that rose like the ribs of a long-dead beast. She walked without direction, her legs trembling from hunger and exhaustion. The sun burned overhead, turning her skin dry and tight. Every breath tasted of metal and dust. Each step was heavier than the last. She had not been given food nor water. Banishment was meant to be slow execution, a kinder-looking cruelty. By the time the sun dipped toward the horizon, her vision blurred at the edges. The deadlands seemed to tilt and sway around her. Yet she forced herself forward, guided by instinct rather than hope. Here and there strange stone pillars jutted from the ground. They were far taller than she was, some leaning, some cracked, all engraved with symbols she had never seen in any palace archive. The markings curved and twisted like living vines, untouched by erosion despite their obvious age. As twilight spread across the land, the pillars began to hum. Not loudly, not like a voice carried on wind, but softly, like a faint vibration awakening under her feet. The ground quivered with a pulse that matched her heartbeat. She froze, unsure whether she was losing her mind or witnessing something hidden from the world for generations. The hum deepened as darkness fell. The stones were not speaking in words. They spoke in tremors, in subtle shifts of energy that traveled through her bones. She pressed her palm to the cracked soil and felt the vibrations intensify. Fear prickled her spine, but so did recognition, an inexplicable sense that the deadlands had been waiting for her. Night brought cold, sharp and merciless. Nurai stumbled until her knees buckled. She collapsed at the base of a massive cracked stone slab, twice her height, wider than the palace gates. The surface shimmered faintly in the moonlight, its fractures glowing like veins beneath skin. She pressed her forehead against the cool stone and closed her eyes, surrendering to fatigue. Her thoughts drifted, tangled between memories and delirium. She heard footsteps, light, familiar, circling around her. Then she heard a voice. Soft, warm. A voice she thought she would never hear again. Nurai, it murmured. The kingdom forgot you, but the earth remembers. Her mother's voice. Her breath hitched and tears slid down her cheeks. She tried to raise her head, but her limbs felt heavy. The voice came again, closer this time, as if someone knelt beside her. You were not meant for the throne they abandoned. You were meant for the roots beneath it. The ground vibrated beneath her, stronger now. The stone slab warmed under her hands. Dust lifted from the cracks, swirling in spirals around her body. Her fingers glowed faintly where they touched the stone. She felt energy seep into her, like invisible threads weaving into her skin. The glow deepened, and the vibrations turned into a steady pulse that synced with her own heartbeat. With sudden clarity she understood. The stones were responding to her. They recognized her. And she recognized them, not with memory but with instinct. As if something buried deep in her blood awoke. Visions burst behind her eyelids, flashes of ancient kings and queens standing before the same stones, placing their hands upon the slabs, drawing power from the earth. She saw the early rulers of Rahamba forming a pact with the land, promising honor and justice in exchange for the stone's protection. She saw the pact broken generations later, erased from history by kings who feared the stone's judgment, kings who preferred absolute power to the weight of accountability. Her own father, she realized, had inherited a rewritten legacy, one built on forgetting the truth. As the visions continued, she saw the injustices committed by her ancestors. Land stolen from villages, mines opened greedily despite the earth's warnings, stones taken and carved into monuments of pride instead of tools of harmony. The stones showed her everything, not out of cruelty but because she was the heir of that history, and its only chance for correction. When the visions faded, Nurai felt different. Her body still ached, but her spirit felt fuller, grounded. She placed both hands on the cracked stone slab. A warm surge of energy shot through her arms and into her chest. The glow beneath the cracks brightened, casting light across the barren land. She felt the stone's power swirling inside her, wild yet teachable. It nudged her mind gently as if guiding her toward understanding. She inhaled and the vibrations shifted, responding to her breath. She exhaled and the ground pulsed again. She lifted a hand experimentally, and the dust around her rose, swirling in slow, obedient circles. The stones were teaching her. Not with language but with memory. With rhythm. With the deep pulse of the earth itself. She had been banished from the kingdom. But here in the Deadlands, among the whispering stones, Nurai found something greater than a throne. She found the beginning of her power. The days that followed were unlike anything Uri had ever known. The Deadlands, once a place of fear and abandonment, slowly transformed into her training ground. Each sunrise brought new whispers beneath her feet, soft tremors that nudged her awake, urging her to stand, to learn, to listen. The stones did not teach with words but with sensations, rhythms in the ground, vibrations in the air, pulses that tugged at the edges of her instincts. She followed these signals, letting them guide her across the ruined landscape. Step by step, her connection to the earth deepened. She practiced first by moving small stones. She would lift her hand and feel the pebbles shudder, twitch, then lift into the air with hesitant grace. It took days before she could move them smoothly, like an extension of her own body. From pebbles she progressed to boulders. She learned to brace her feet, inhale deeply, and channel the tremors rising from the soil through her arms. When she pushed her hands forward, the earth responded, shifting massive rocks that should have required 10 men to move. She sharpened slabs of stone into spears with a single sweep of her palm, shaping their edges with a sculptor's precision guided by instinct alone. As her strength grew, she learned to listen beyond the space around her. Standing still, eyes closed, she could feel the heartbeat of the land stretching miles in every direction. A distant tremor from a collapsing cavern. The faint quiver of wind brushing against tall pillars. The low hum of a stone deep underground, vibrating with ancient knowledge. She came to understand that the earth was alive with memories and that her mind could tap into those echoes if she calmed herself enough to hear. But mastery also demanded control. She quickly learned that her emotions were inseparable from her power. When anger flared, when she remembered her father's turned face, the citizens' silent backs, the ground convulsed beneath her feet. Stones cracked, pillars swayed, dust swirled violently. Her rage sent shudders across the Deadlands in waves. Yet when sorrow washed over her, the ground softened, settling into stillness as if comforting her grief. The earth empathized with her, it felt what she felt. She realized she had to govern her heart before she could command her gift. One evening, as the twilight faded into cool darkness, she wandered deeper into the ruins. There she found them, towering statues half buried in stone, shaped like ancient warriors with arms folded across their chests. Their eyes were shut, their expressions solemn as if frozen mid-meditation. Dust blanketed their surfaces and vines crept around their limbs like shackles. Something about them drew her close. She reached out but hesitated to touch. Instead, she hummed an old melody, one her mother used to sing when brushing Uri's hair. The moment her voice carried through the air, the ground beneath the statues trembled. Slowly their eyelids cracked open, revealing faint amber glows. Dust exploded from their joints as their stone limbs shifted. With heavy, echoing steps, they straightened, towering above her like silent protectors summoned from forgotten ages. They did not speak, but they bowed their heads in recognition. Not to a princess, not to a cast-out child, but to their stone-bound heir. In that moment, something settled in Uri's heart, something firm, unshakable. She was no longer the girl the kingdom erased. No longer the shadow forced out in humiliation. She was part of the earth's memory, bound to a legacy her ancestors tried to bury. She felt the power thrumming in her bones, the ancient pact breathing through her veins. She lifted her chin, the stone guardians flanking her like sentinels of destiny. She made a vow, her voice steady and sure, she would return to Ruhamba. Not merely to seek vengeance, though the sting of her exile still lived within her, but to restore the truth her father had smothered beneath fear and pride. She would reclaim the throne not as a forgotten princess, but as the rightful heir chosen by the land itself. And the Deadlands answered her vow with a deep, resonant pulse, as if the earth approved. Ruhamba was dying and everyone could feel it. The once fertile fields surrounding the capital had turned into patches of cracked earth. Farmers prayed for rain, but the skies remained empty, as if the ancestors themselves had turned their faces away. Children walked with hollow eyes and the markets, once bursting with color, were now reduced to whispers and wilted baskets of whatever could still grow. The famine had begun like a small wound, but now it had spread through the kingdom like an unseen rot. Inside the palace, the king grew thinner, quieter, more frightened of shadows than of the suffering of his people. He no longer held counsel, no longer walked among his subjects. He remained locked inside his chambers, surrounded by incense and trembling servants. And at the center of his downfall stood Councilman Murogi. Murogi had wormed his way into the king's trust over the years, speaking softly, bowing low, serving as the loyal advisor. But everyone could now see how his influence had twisted the throne. He controlled the taxation, hoarded grain in secret granaries, and executed anyone who questioned his orders. He whispered poison into the king's ear, turning him paranoid, isolated, and blind. Some said Murogi used dark rituals to maintain control. Others said he simply knew which fear lived in which heart. Whatever the truth, his power tightened around Rahamba like a tightening noose. Meanwhile, the earth itself had begun to misbehave. Every night, small tremors rattled the kingdom, cups trembling, walls humming, stones rolling on their own across floors. At first people blamed the famine, thinking hunger made them hallucinate. But the tremors grew stronger each night, always just before dawn. Then came the symbol. A strange mark began appearing throughout the palace, drawn in dust, carved into stone, burned into the wooden doors of the council chambers. The symbol was a circle split by a jagged line, surrounded by 4 smaller dots. The birth symbol of Nirai, the symbol the king had ordered erased from every record after her disappearance. Priests fell to their knees in terror each time they saw it. "This is a curse," one cried. "An omen," whispered another. "A warning." Murogi dismissed their fear, but secretly, he had ordered guards to scrub every mark the moment it appeared. Yet no matter how quickly they erased them, the symbol returned, stronger, darker, almost alive. Old women in the markets began telling stories again, stories they had been forbidden to speak. They wanted to kill the princess, they said. They cast her out. But the earth never abandons its children. In a small mud hut at the edge of the capital, Gogo Melita, the ancient seer who had served 4 generations of rulers, sat cross-legged in the dark and listened to the tremors beneath her feet. Her blind eyes moved behind their lids as if reading messages written inside the earth. "It is her," she whispered. "She has awakened." She sent small spirit messengers, sparks of dust and air, to search for the source of the tremors. Each time they returned with the same message: a familiar presence stirs in the deadlands. Rumors spread through the kingdom faster than fire in dry grass. "Someone has been seen walking the outskirts," one villager murmured. "A woman made of stone," another added. "No," insisted a traveler. "Not made of stone," followed by it. The tales grew wilder every night. Some said she cracked open the ground with her bare feet. Others claimed her eyes glowed like the cracks of a dying mountain. Still others swore they saw great stone pillars moving behind her like loyal soldiers. The council dismissed the stories as superstition, but fear crept into their eyes. Because deep down even they knew. The princess they tried to erase was coming back. And the kingdom itself was rising with her. The deadlands were vast, stretching beyond what most people of Rahamba believed existed. But Nirai walked them with purpose, moving through dust storms and jagged plains as if the earth whispered directions beneath her feet. Each step was guided by the stones of Rahamba, whose teachings still hummed in her blood like a second heartbeat. She was no longer the starving girl who had collapsed among the whispering stones. She now moved with quiet strength, the ground shifting subtly beneath her like a loyal companion. And she was not alone for long. The refugees of the salt plains. Her journey first led her to a group of refugees camped along the salt plains. They were gaunt, wrapped in torn cloths, their feet cracked from walking for days. When Nirai approached, they flinched, fearing another slaver raid. "I am not here to harm you," she said softly. A trembling woman stepped forward. "No one comes here unless they are lost." Nirai touched the ground with her palm. It rumbled gently, comfortingly, like a lion purring. The refugees gasped. "We are all lost," she said. "But the earth still knows our names." Hope, fragile but alive, flickered in their eyes. They followed her. The exiled at the shattered ridge. Farther north she found exiles, scholars, healers and former rebels, banished by Murogi's cruel decrees. They lived in caves, surviving on roots and melted frost. They recognized the symbol etched faintly on her wrist, the stone-born mark once belonging to her lineage. "You should not exist," an old man whispered. "I exist because they wanted me gone," she replied. The stones around her shifted, rising into small protective pillars as if responding to her soul. The exiles bowed instinctively. "Then you are the one we have been waiting for," they said. They too followed her. The enslaved miners of Kavumba Gorge. But it was at Kavumba Gorge that Nirai fully stepped into her destiny. The gorge was a scar in the earth, deep, dark and full of chains. Children and elders alike were forced to mine rare stones for the corrupt council. Their cries echoed off the jagged walls day and night. Nirai stepped into the gorge with quiet fury burning behind her eyes. Guards jeered at her. "Another wanderer come to die?" She didn't answer. Instead she pressed her bare foot to the ground. The gorge shuddered. Cracks spidered across the ground, shaking loose boulders that rolled like awakened beasts. The guards panicked, drawing weapons, but the stones rose between them like shields, blocking every attack. Nurai swept her hand through the air, and the chains binding the miners shattered like glass. Gasps rose from the freed prisoners. "Who are you?" a boy whispered. Nurai looked at the dust swirling around her, forming circles the way the whispering stones had taught her. "I am the daughter of the earth," she said. And the miners repeated it in awe. "Daughter of the earth. Daughter of the earth. The mountain stronghold." With hundreds now following her, Nurai searched for a place they could call home, a sanctuary hidden from the king, from Urogi, from all who had forgotten them. She found it in an abandoned mountain peak, a towering slab of black stone untouched by raiders or slavers. At first glance, it was nothing but a cold, empty cliff. But when Nurai laid her hands upon it, the mountain breathed. Its insides shifted like a living creature remembering an old command. Caverns opened, smooth and echoing. Pathways carved themselves into the rock. Rooms emerged, wide enough for an army. Her followers watched with trembling awe as Nurai shaped the mountain into a stronghold, a fortress born not by hand but by the will of the earth. Raising the forgotten. Days turned into weeks. Nurai trained her people, not in war alone but in unity. She taught them to read signs in the soil, to listen to tremors, to track water beneath the ground. The scholars taught the children. The healers tended the wounded miners. The refugees planted the first seeds in the mountain's sheltered valley. It was not an army of trained warriors. It was an army of the broken, the abandoned, the forgotten, people whom the kingdom believed were too weak to rise. But under Nurai's guidance, they rose like mountains. The vow carved in stone. One night, under a quiet sky, Nurai took a shard of black rock and carved a sentence into the mountain wall, each stroke glowing with ancient power. "Every stone shall remember my name." Her people gathered behind her, silent, reverent. For the first time since her exile, Nurai felt not alone, but destined. Rumors spread long before Nurai's army was ever seen. The land itself began to whisper of her return. Farmers awoke to trembling soil beneath their huts. Children reported seeing stone figures standing on hillsides at dawn, and shepherds swore that the carved guardians of the ancient roads were shifting positions during the night. What began as soft murmurs became undeniable tremors. The kingdom of Ruhamba, which had ignored her existence for years, could no longer ignore the earth's warning. The first statue awakened near the river Manda, an 8-foot sentinel carved in the shape of a warrior whose eyes glowed a dim amber. Before sunrise, 3 more rose from the soil, pulling themselves free like ancient soldiers shaking off centuries of dust. Villagers fled, screaming prayers and clutching their children as the statues marched silently toward the palace. Not to attack, but to warn. Because Nurai had commanded them so. From her mountain stronghold, she placed her palm on the ground, letting her heartbeat sync with the pulse of the stones of Ruhamba. Through the living earth, her message traveled, an ancient current flowing beneath rivers, hills and plains. Stone messengers, shaped by her will, broke from mountainsides and cliff faces, their bodies glowing with inscriptions only the old ancestors would recognize. They carried her warning. Prepare your hearts. Justice is walking back to you. But in Ruhamba, truth rarely reached the right ears. Councilman Urogi twisted the message into poison. As a messenger statue approached the palace gates and placed a stone tablet before the guards, Murogi ordered archers to destroy it. The arrows shattered against its chest, bouncing away like twigs hitting iron. Only when it delivered the inscription and stepped back did it dissolve into dust, peaceful as drifting ash. Murogi picked up the tablet and smirked. "Witchcraft," he declared loudly, letting fear ripple through the nobles. "A curse upon Ruhamba. The banished princess summons demons from the dust. If the king does not prepare for war, she will swallow the kingdom whole." The king sat on his throne, trembling. Lines of exhaustion had carved themselves into his face. The famine, the whispers, the guilt that gnawed at him every night, everything weighed heavily on him. When he closed his eyes, he saw Nurai standing at the palace courtyard years ago, staring back at him with a mixture of pain and longing. He remembered how he had turned away. "Is she truly a threat?" he whispered. Murogi leaned closer, voice sharp as a blade. "She is no longer your daughter. She is the enemy of Ruhamba." Yet somewhere in the king's heart, a voice disagreed. A quiet voice he had spent years silencing. Meanwhile, Nurai's people marched toward Ruhamba in disciplined lines. They were not an army forged in iron, but an army forged in suffering. Exiles, orphans, miners freed from chains, refugees who had lost everything, They followed her willingly, some chanting her name, others walking in reverent silence. The ground beneath them rippled like waves guiding them forward. Each tremor was a note in the song the earth itself had begun to sing. When Uri walked, stones lifted under her feet like stepping stools forming in real time. Dust swirled into spirals around her. She wore a cloak carved from thin sheets of shale that moved like fabric but shimmered like polished armor. Her presence felt ancient, prophetic, inevitable. As they neared the outer border of Rahamba, her stone guardians marched beside them, towering statues whose footsteps echoed like thunder. Birds abandoned the sky. Trees shook their leaves loose. The air grew heavy with anticipation. And in the kingdom, panic erupted. Children cried as statues appeared outside the palace walls, standing silently like watchful giants. Merchants abandoned their stalls. Priests burned incense frantically and shouted prayers into the wind. Across the city, citizens locked themselves indoors, whispering that the forgotten princess had returned with the wrath of the ancestors. But not all feared her. Gogo Melita, frail, slow but unwavering, snuck through the palace corridors at night. She lit a single candle and wrote a message on old parchment with trembling hands. Uri, child of my heart, do not punish the innocent. They too suffered under those who silenced you. She found a loyal servant boy and pressed the message into his palm. Take it to the army approaching from the Deadlands, she whispered. Look for the girl who walks with the earth. The boy nodded and slipped into the night. As the first stars appeared above Rahamba, Uri paused on a hill overlooking the kingdom, sensing a new vibration through the soil, soft, familiar, and filled with love. Someone had sent her a plea. And Uri, despite her rising power, felt her heart tighten. Justice was coming. But so was mercy. The entrance to Rahamba was not guarded the way Uri expected. The city itself seemed to part for her, the ground whispering secrets of old tunnels, pathways hidden beneath streets and stone. She pressed her hand against the cobblestones, and the earth responded, shaking slightly as a fissure opened, wide enough to swallow a horse. Uri descended into the underground passages she had carved with her power, the air thick with dust, echoes, and memories of forgotten lives. The Deadlands had trained her to feel the heartbeat of stone, to hear the murmurs beneath it, and now the city whispered to her in waves of anticipation. The tunnels twisted beneath the palace walls, following old foundations buried atop the bones of past rulers. Every step she took made the palace shiver. Walls groaned, floorboards rattled as though recognizing her presence. Dust fell from the ceilings in gentle plumes, dancing in the pale light of her glowing hands. Uri paused in a wide chamber, inhaling the damp, metallic scent of history. This palace, this house of bones, had never truly forgotten her either. Her first encounter was with Murogi. He had fled to the council chambers, thinking the stone guardians would never follow her so far, that the palace itself would protect him. But the ground beneath him reacted before she even spoke. Pillars shifted. Cracks widened. Statues that had been dormant for decades lurched from corners, their stone fists moving silently, decisively. Murogi tried to draw his sword, but the air around him thickened, the floor trembling violently. Before he could cry for mercy, the stones reached out, claws of earth and rock bursting from the tiles, dragging him screaming into the darkness beneath the palace. His voice echoed in the corridors until it was swallowed by stone. Uri did not pause to gloat. She moved deeper into the palace, corridors narrowing, walls lined with the echoes of generations. And there, atop the throne carved from ancient bones, sat her father, King Mandebvu. His crown was crooked, his robes wrinkled and dust-stained from fear, despair, and inattention. He looked small, diminished, fragile. When he saw her, his eyes widened, not with recognition alone, but with the weight of every wrong decision, every whispered fear, every year he had spent pretending she did not exist. Uri, he said, voice breaking. I'm sorry. You feared me, she interrupted softly, though the trembling of her hands betrayed her own fury. You feared what the elders said about my birth, the prophecy you could not understand. You cast me aside, and the kingdom followed your shadow instead of justice. He dropped to his knees, tears streaking through his gray-bearded face. I forgot. No. I feared the omen. I feared losing the throne, losing the kingdom. I never wanted to hurt you, my daughter. Forgive me. Uri looked at him, at the man behind the crown, the broken figure shivering with guilt and regret. Her heart clenched, remembering years of exile, nights spent in the barren Deadlands, the faces of those she had freed, the stones that had whispered to her, guiding her steps. She saw him clearly now, stripped of authority and illusion, but clarity did not demand forgiveness. "You forgot me," she said, voice steady, echoing in the halls of bone. But the stones never did. The palace trembled violently as if affirming her words. Dust and shards of stone fell from the ceilings. The throne room shivered in recognition. Nurai's eyes glowed with the subtle light of the stones coursing beneath her skin. She did not strike. She did not need to. Her presence alone was judgment. Her father's eyes widened in fear, guilt, and realization. The past had not disappeared. Every wrong, every act of neglect, every betrayal he had committed now rose before him, not as punishment from her alone, but as the voice of the earth demanding acknowledgement. And in that tense silence, the palace of bones itself seemed to sigh, mourning and witnessing in equal measure. Nurai stood over him, still, unwavering, the air of stone and destiny, ready to restore the balance the kingdom had long forgotten. Nurai raised her hands, and the ground beneath the palace groaned in response. From the floors and walls, from hidden tunnels and long-forgotten foundations, the ancient stone tribunal awakened. They emerged first as shadows, then as hulking forms of carved granite and obsidian, statues taller than the palace towers themselves, with eyes glowing amber and cracks tracing the shape of centuries-old wisdom. Each movement sent tremors rolling outward, shaking the palace walls and echoing through the city streets beyond. Citizens poured into the courtyards and streets surrounding the palace, drawn by fear, awe, and curiosity. They had never witnessed power like this. Stone titans animated by magic older than memory, stepping from the earth itself. Windows shuddered, doors rattled, and the bells in the towers tolled on their own as though warning the kingdom of impending judgment. Mothers clutched their children, merchants dropped their wares, priests fell to the ground chanting prayers in desperation. The trembling was more than mere fear, it was reverence. Nurai's voice rang out, calm yet commanding, carrying both authority and sorrow. "Behold the tribunal of the stones. Witness truth. Witness justice. And know that no lie, no cruelty, no forgetting will remain hidden beneath the earth or behind walls." The stone guardians turned as one, their immense forms shifting toward the throne where her father, King Mandebvu, knelt trembling. The tribunal's eyes glowed brighter, and suddenly in the space of Nurai's command, the king was no longer just a man before them. He was surrounded by spectral visions, memories projected for all to see. He saw every act of cruelty, every neglect, every order he had issued that had led to famine, suffering, and exile. He saw children starving while he dined, exiles wandering in despair while he ignored their pleas, and Nurai herself, cast out for a prophecy he feared more than love. The king clutched at his face, but he could not turn away. Each memory struck him like stone against bone. Every lie, every act of cowardice, every betrayal was laid bare. The tribunal's silent judgment was relentless, a force older than crowns or law. The stones had remembered everything the humans had chosen to forget. When the visions faded, Nurai stepped closer. Her eyes glowed softly with the light of the stones she had bound to her soul. "The past will not be forgotten," she said. "But it need not end in death. Justice does not demand blood. It demands truth, accountability, and remembrance." She gestured toward the city gates. "You will live among those you abandoned. You will see them suffer and survive, and you will learn the weight of the kingdom you once ignored. Go to the Deadlands, where every stone will bear witness to your deeds, where every echo will speak of your failures. There you will begin again, not as king but as one who has been truly judged." The king fell silent, tears streaming, fear mingling with the first glimmers of understanding. He was exiled, not destroyed but made to walk among the forgotten, humbled by the earth itself. Murogi and the remaining council fared worse. The tribunal's stony fingers erupted through the floor beneath their chambers, dragging them down into a shifting labyrinth of living stone. Their screams echoed briefly before being absorbed into the walls themselves, their bodies merging with the very foundation of the palace. Stone twisted and moved around them, reshaping the earth into a prison as eternal as it was unforgiving. Outside the kingdom trembled. Walls cracked. Towers swayed. The streets themselves seemed to realign, slowly, deliberately, reshaping the city's foundations in harmony with the ancient stones and with Nurai's vision. Where corruption had rooted itself, new patterns emerged. Streets, plazas, and fortifications echoing the balance of justice and memory. It was as though the kingdom itself remembered, bending to the will of its rightful heir. Nurai stood atop the highest steps of the Palace of Bones, the stone guardians at her back, the city trembling before her, and whispered to the winds, "Let the foundations remember. Let the living earth bear witness." Let this kingdom rise again, not for kings, not for power, but for truth and for all those forgotten. And for the first time in decades, Ruhamba felt alive. The air in Ruhamba was electric with change. The tremors that had haunted the city for months gradually softened, replaced by a steady, quiet pulse that resonated like a heartbeat of hope. From the highest towers to the lowest streets, people emerged from their homes, blinking in sunlight that felt warmer, fuller, and forgiving. The kingdom had endured darkness, corruption, famine, and fear, but the arrival of Nirai and the stone tribunal had shifted everything. On the steps of the rebuilt palace of bones, the daughter of the earth stood. She no longer wore the tattered cloak of exile or the roughened hands of the deadlands. Instead, her robe shimmered with the subtle sheen of polished stone, echoing the light within her veins. Yet she refused the golden throne that gleamed atop the dais, offered by nobles who had survived Murogi's purges and feared her wrath. Gold could not embody her reign. Instead, she approached the first stone that had whispered her name, the one that had called to her in her grief, despair, and eventual awakening. From it, she carved a throne, solid, enduring, alive with the memory of the earth itself, and seated herself upon it. Her people, the forgotten and oppressed, gathered at her feet. The miners who had felt the chains fall from their hands, the exiles who had wandered for years, the refugees who had been left to starve, they now formed the backbone of the kingdom. They were no longer shadows, they were pillars. Nirai raised her hand, and a tremor ran gently through the plaza. Dust rose, then settled, forming patterns across the stones, each marking the names and faces of those who had been ignored. Ruhamba will no longer forget, she declared, voice carrying across the kingdom. We rebuild not for crowns, not for gold, not for the whims of kings, but for every soul who has ever been cast aside. From that moment the work began. Crops long abandoned sprang green across fields that had been cracked and barren. Wells, once dry, filled with clear water, as if the earth itself had approved of her reign. The tremors ceased, not out of fear but as a gift from the stones of Ruhamba, which now pulsed in harmony with her people's joy and resilience. Festivals returned, spontaneous and colorful, echoing through the streets. Music rose again, drums beating in rhythm with laughter, and children danced barefoot on streets that were once silent. The palace, now reshaped by stone and her will, became a living monument. Pillars carved with the stories of injustice, survival, and triumph lined the halls. Nirai decreed that her story, and the story of the kingdoms forgotten, be etched into every stone, so no future ruler could erase memory as her father had attempted. The city itself became a library of resilience, each rock a page, each wall a chronicle of courage and endurance. Her council was no longer composed of nobles with pedigrees or empty loyalty. The leaders were those who had suffered and survived, the exiled scholars, the freed miners, the healers who had tended the dead and the starving. They governed with wisdom born from experience, compassion rooted in shared hardship. Decisions were made not in isolation, but through discussion, debate, and reflection. Ruhamba became a kingdom of balance, justice, and remembrance. And the king, once proud and distant, remained in the deadlands, humbled by exile, learning the lessons of neglect and fear. He walked among the people he had abandoned, guided by the subtle tremors that once spoke only to his daughter, now teaching him the value of memory, empathy, and the weight of leadership earned, not inherited. Nirai herself became legend even as she lived among the people. Travelers spoke of her as the stone-bound queen, daughter of the earth, the one who had returned from exile to awaken both the stones and the hearts of the kingdom. And everywhere she went, the stones whispered, not warnings this time, but songs of hope, echoes of endurance, reminders that the earth itself kept vigil for those who dared to rise. Her final act as sovereign was simple but profound. She placed her hands upon each major stone pillar across the capital, etching into them her story, her oath, and her vision. A kingdom stands not on its king, but on those it chooses to remember. From that day on, Ruhamba's foundation was not a throne, not a crown, not fear or authority. It was memory, loyalty, and the unwavering truth of those who had endured. And in that rebirth, the kingdom flourished like never before. The sun shone over fields that once wept with drought. Children's laughter carried through alleys that once echoed only with despair. And Nirai, seated upon the stone that had whispered to her in the shadows of exile, felt the kingdom breathe in unison with her heartbeat, alive, enduring, remembered forever.